Hello, in this video I want to talk about the silent treatment. The silent treatment and ghosting are often confused, but there's quite a difference between them. Ghosting is what happens when somebody disappears completely from your life with no particular reason. Then there was no argument, they haven't been offended by you, they just disappear. And the reason that that happens is usually that they are afraid to reject you. You know, they don't want to have to experience the rejecting and you getting upset or offended. So they're sort of wimping out, and that will usually happen in a dating situation. It is fairly narcissistic, but it's also quite normal. So it's not something that a narcissist will do as opposed to anyone else. I mean, it can happen sometimes that someone will just do that when they're in a relationship. They'll suddenly disappear, and in that case, that can be more serious. That, you know, if they've been with someone for a very long time and they disappear for really no reason at all, as it would seem, that would also be ghosting. But and I guess, you know, some narcissists might do that. It might be a sort of power thing for them to do that. But mostly when people talk about ghosting in terms of a narcissist, they're usually talking about the silent treatment. And the silent treatment is when the narcissist will take offense to something that you've said or done. They'll see it as rejection or as criticism. In reality, they're trying to get back in control of the relationship, which, you know, they're only comfortable in a relationship if they are in complete control. So if you set a boundary, for example, they can see that as criticism and rejection. And it often happens when somebody sets a boundary. Sometimes the narcissist is just pretending they're offended. They don't feel hurt, they don't even feel shame. They just sense that you're feeling empowered enough to set a boundary or to ask them to change their behaviour. And they don't want you to feel like that because they need to have all the power themselves. So by doing the silent treatment, they can then redress that power balance. And they can get you back into the position of just being really grateful that they will spend time with you. And so the narcissist is trying to regain their power, which they think they've lost because they have to be perfect. You know, their mask, that I've spoken about this quite a lot in other videos, that they have this mask that is the sort of perfect idea they have about who they are, but it's not really who they are. It's just who they think they are and who they want the world to see that they are. And this mask has to remain intact and perfect. So if they perceive that their mask is being faulted in any way, they have to get back to the idea that there's nothing wrong with them, that they are not at fault in any way, and they have to hold on to this, because if they're to start accepting the blame for anything or seeing any fault, then the void opens and they start to see the truth about themselves, and they have so much self-loathing inside themselves that means they then risk seeing all of that. And, you know, if you think about it, if they're to blame for one of these behaviours, it then opens the door to all of the rest of the abuse and to all of the other things that they've done that mean that they're at fault. You know, so there's a lot of pressure on them. In fact, the more abusive they are and the longer the abuse has gone on for, the more pressure there is on them to make sure that they don't take responsibility for anything. And the silent treatment is a way of pushing that responsibility back onto you and telling you that they are the victim and that you're the abuser, that they are in fact the mature one in this situation, and that you're the one who's maybe oversensitive, overdramatic, just really difficult to handle, you know, and that the issues are all yours. They might think that they're really mature for handling it in this way, for just not engaging with you, you know, or at least they want you to think that they're just above this situation and you're the problem. Giving the silent treatment is not something that only narcissists do, although it is a narcissistic way to behave. In many relationships, people take turn giving the silent treatment to each other. And in almost every case, it's been found that using the silent treatment, no matter who's doing it, damages a relationship, because it makes the other person feel like they can't communicate, like they're walking on eggshells because they're worried that the next thing they say, they're going to be given the silent treatment again. So it's usually what happens before a breakdown in a relationship. A narcissist might use the silent treatment just before the final discard, so it could be confused with ghosting in that way, because they might disappear and use that as an excuse to discard you, just to sort of sum up the idea that it's all your fault. And when a narcissist uses the silent treatment, what they're doing is they're abusing you, but they're dressing it up and trying to confuse you into believing that you are the abuser and they're the victim. You know, they've gone silent because they're so hurt by something that you've done. And in reality, going silent on somebody, ignoring them, is extremely painful for the person who's ignored. You know, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit further on in the video. But it's an extremely painful form of abuse, and it's the narcissist's way of really sort of having a very passive-aggressive tantrum. It's very childish behaviour. It's one of the reasons it's so childish is because it takes into account the fact that you care. You know, the silent treatment will only work if somebody is trying to be in touch with the person, if they're trying to continue a conversation, and, you know, so they're behaving more like the mature adult. If the other person doesn't care and isn't going to get in contact, then the silent treatment won't work. So the narcissist knows that you care when they do the silent treatment. And that's what makes it really extra childish, because it's like a small child whose caregiver, you know, maybe their mother is, you know, is trying to care for them, and they're just throwing this tantrum. One of the biggest challenges when you're recovering from narcissistic abuse is facing up to what was and wasn't your responsibility, because a victim of abuse will usually take much more responsibility for things than they should. And the silent treatment is one of those ways that the narcissist will encourage you to take responsibility for them, for their own issues. You know, because you're the one that's left thinking it's your fault. And that's the whole point of the abuse. You know, that's exactly how they want you to feel. And in reality, if somebody employs the silent treatment, it means that they are not seeing the situation rationally. And the reason for this is because the kind of person to use the silent treatment can't manage conflict, or not even conflict, they just can't manage any form of disagreement in an adult way. They're not capable of talking things through because they're going to have too strong a reaction to what they perceive as criticism. So somebody who uses the silent treatment is therefore not actually seeing the situation rationally in the first place in order to use the silent treatment. And so when somebody does that to you, you can know that the fact that they are doing this means that it's unlikely you've done something as wrong as they're suggesting. You may have done nothing wrong. You may have done nothing offensive. You know, how you behave might be perceived by the kind of person who wouldn't use the silent treatment, that it might be perceived as non-offensive behaviour. Because you know, when people don't need to use the silent treatment, they can come to you and say to you that they're offended and that it made them feel bad when you behaved in such and such a way. They can, you know, if it's that bad, they can even tell you that they don't feel the relationship is healthy for them, you know, and they don't want to be in contact anymore. But all of these things are different ways to communicate with you how they're feeling, and they, you know, and possibly even setting boundaries with you. So when somebody can't do that, it's because it's of their own issues. And I think it's really important to remember that, and not to just respond too emotionally when it happens, to just hold on to your rational mind. In general, the more childishly someone behaves, the more likely they're not seeing things rationally, in which case the more responsibility for the situation is actually theirs. So, you know, that's something that might help when somebody sort of throws you off course and you start thinking that you must have done something really terrible. You know, when somebody ignores you, you might think, wow, what would it take for me to actually ignore someone? They'd have to have done something terrible. What have I done? Maybe I did do something truly shocking and I just don't realise it. And it's quite likely that if you've spent a lot of time with a narcissist, you'll get into that state of mind, because they will have done many things to encourage you to doubt yourself. As humans, we have a need to be seen. So if we're ignored, we don't feel loved, we don't feel worthy of being seen and known. And that's really painful, because we become invisible and we feel unloved. So, you know, so what does that say about us? If somebody ignores us, it says that we don't matter to them, we don't have any value, they don't need us in their life. When you're being ignored, the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain is being activated, and that's the part of the brain that picks up on physical pain. So that's why the kind of pain you feel can be really quite severe, and that makes sense as well, because in evolutionary terms, people, if they were ignored by a group, you know, if they became an outsider of the group, then they were in physical danger. They might be harmed by an animal or by another tribe. So it's therefore extremely painful to be ignored. And it's the kind of thing that is a sort of hidden form of abuse, because when it's happening, the narcissist can easily pretend it isn't. People can't often notice it. You know, other people who are around might not know what's going on. And if you are to ask, are you ignoring me? Then they can just say no. You know, so it's very covert in nature. And it can also be the kind of abuse where the narcissist can almost pretend that they're the one that's being a bigger person. But in reality, it's a very immature way to behave, because it shows an inability to face up to their own feelings and to be able to handle yours. So don't fall for that. They're the ones who are being childish and abusive by behaving like that. So a narcissist will make sure that, you know, that they're the victim of your crazy abuse, you know, and that they're putting up with you, and now they just need a break from contact because you're so difficult to manage. And in reality, if they were as mature as they like to think they are, and if they could handle their own emotions, then they would be able to talk things through with you, to tell you if something you've done has bothered them, and to talk about their feelings about it, to say how, you know, whether it upsets them or hurts them, or how, you know, how they feel because of it, and in a non-aggressive way. And they'd want to hear your point of view, they'd want to hear how you were feeling and what's been going on for you, you know, why you behave like that. They'd be interested to hear it if you talk to them about it. So and that way, you know, things can be resolved. The way to find out whether a relationship works or not is when you're in a situation of conflict. How is that conflict managed? Does one of you have to be the good person and the other one have to be wrong? Does one of you have to be punished every time they, you know, they get something wrong? Because that kind of relationship is never going to work. It's just a game of power. You know, and that's how relationships are with narcissists, because for them everything is a competition, and it's easy to get swallowed up in that game and to become competitive yourself. And when you do that, you really lose touch with the real world and what really matters, and your own power. You know, you get sucked into the narcissist world, and that's when everything becomes a lot harder to see rationally, because you see everything in terms of who's being perceived as powerful by the other. Power is only power. It's not caring about somebody or feeling close to them. It's actually the opposite usually. And I say usually because when it comes to a parent-child relationship, the parent does have more power and can still express love, and the child can still feel loved and understand that there's this power difference. But in adult relationships, you can't feel intimate with somebody who always has to have the power and control of the relationship. So I'm going to leave it here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.